Sahana Vavatu, Sahanao Bhunaktu, Sahaviryang Karavavahai, Tejasvina Vadhitamastu, Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. One last revision before we move on to like the next section of chapter 2, which is the self-knowledge, is that Arjun was feeling overwhelmed, and he then left it to Krishna to kind of take care of him and to guide him, because he was not, quite certain what is to be done. And Krishna kind of surprised him, and he said that, what's this? Just go and do what is to be done, right? You're a warrior. You're accustomed to this. You've been doing this all your life. You're trained, and you've got all of the skills, and nobody else can do this. And so Arjuna was taken a little bit back, because we all empathize with someone who's going through, some time, and they need some guidance. And then you just say, what are you doing, right? Just go and do it's like, it's that simple. But then Arjuna didn't see it that simple. He was emotionally bound to the situation, so he couldn't quite move on. And he then took it to another level, and Arjuna said, so Krishna, the reason why I cannot get myself to do what is to be done is there are people involved. There's a story between me and the other. There's a story between us. It's not just a matter of, okay, let's just separate. It's like it's a huge thing for if you got a connection with someone, it's not just as easy as just doing what has to be done. But if you had that objectivity of Krishna, then it will be a lot easier. But not all of us are at Krishna's level, so naturally Arjuna is going to have some some hesitation. So then Arjuna says, there are gurus on my side, there are gurus on that side, and right, they made me who I am, and I cannot just go over there and just, do whatever I want, even though I can kind of kill them. It's not the right thing to do. And so he then qualifies this question, and he says, Dharma samudha chetaha. And what it means is that he says, I'm not certain what is the right thing to be done in this moment. And this is just a natural human thing that we have. You're not certain in your unique situation what's the right thing to be done right now. You want to know. You don't want to make a mistake. You don't want, repercussions to be not in your favor. So you want all of the circumstances that when you say yes or when you say no, then right, a week from now, you say, I'm so glad I said yes or no to that, because it was the exact right thing to do. And if it's not 1 week, then 5 years or 1 year, you can say, I'm so glad I made that decision, because it was exactly keeping with what I felt was true, and the way that things unfolded, they warranted my response, which was either a yes or a no. So we all want to be in this situation. And so naturally, Arjun, right, he or she is having the exact same thing. Arjuna is not being difficult right now. Is Arjuna being difficult to Krishna by not kind of, doing what needs to be done? Is he being difficult? Is he like giving him a hard time? Is he being arrogant? Is he being, no, I'm not going to do this? Right? Not at all. So we have to, right, understand where he's coming from, where she's coming from. It's not just a he, it's also a she. So naturally, right, you want to, ask for some guidance. And he wants to, right, he acknowledges he doesn't know. But then he then qualifies this with another question, and he says, well, even if I were to do the right thing, so what? Then what? Okay, I've done the right thing. Then what? Now another challenge confronts you, and then again, it's the same story, right? Do the right thing again. And then again, right? Another situation comes and you do the right thing. And so a whole life goes into just solving things and doing the right thing. And Arjuna wants to know, is this all there is to it? I just came here to do the right thing, to be smooth in my responses, to be an effective communicator, to be a warrior, a warrioress, to conduct the deal, to make the transaction, to serve the community. Is that it? Because I'm still the same person that I was before. Nothing's really changed. Only my situation has changed. Only the external circumstances have changed. And there's some composure in there, but still there's a person who is relatively dissatisfied because there's always one more that you can get. There's always one more kingdom to conquer. There's always one more job applicants to get. There's always one more some other word to one more class to attend. And you're like, well, what's the point of all of this? It's just basically taking 26 letters of the English alphabet from A to Z, and you're just rearranging letters. And you say, I want more letters, please. Please keep rearranging more letters so that they sound different, and put those sections, rearrange those sections, and then deliver that to me. And then the next day you say, please do that again. And you're like, but what's the point of all of this? And so, and so this is a discerning mind, which we call, buddhi. A buddhi has a certain kind of, discrimination, a discriminative inquiry is being performed by Arjuna. And so he says that, number one, situational, I want to know what is to be done. And number two, fundamental. What is the existential question here? What is all of this for? What's the ultimate achievement while living? What is it all going towards, if there is something to go towards? And what, when I die, okay, so all of my resume of all of my accomplishments are just gone. But for what? For whom, right? What happens to that person who has done all of that? Is that what life is asking us? Just work hard, solve things one after another, and then life just takes your life away. It's kind of like unfair, right? If you take out the existential question. So the existential question has to also be brought in. Otherwise, there's no meaning to just solving and being a good person. For whom is it being done? Okay? So if you ask anyone, they will all want one or two, hopefully two of these questions to be resolved. Usually we will start with situational matters, but then you ask them about the fundamental and you say, are you fulfilled? Are you truly fulfilled? And most will say yes. Most will say yes, actually. And you say, oh, okay. However, there is that silent what underneath that? Yes, there is a three-letter word, but. Yes, of course I'm fulfilled, but. So in other words, but the world has to comply how I want it to comply. But, so it's conditional. Things have to happen my way, the way that I want it to happen, right? I'm happy as long as my spouse is there, my children are there, they're coming to see me every week. The teaching is there, my pets are there, and my house is there, the job is there, well-being, the physical well-being is there. So there are so many silent buts that the person never hears themselves in their lifetime, and yet they're just like a huge, stacked of buts. And so the way that we preserve this voice of buts down is we go and get busy in life. And so we just kind of get things, solving things, and it makes you feel good. Oh, I've resolved something. I've had a conversation. I've attained something amazing. But those buts remain conditional, and they can never be fulfilled, because even if you were to draw out that but, yeah, but the environment has to, be my way. Yeah, but the colleagues have to be my way. See, even if that were to happen, someone else walks in, some new person walks in, and again, they cancel all of that status of your conditional fulfillment. So we're not talking about conditional fulfillment. We're talking about fulfillment despite circumstances, whatever they are. Okay, so this is a huge difference in looking at it from a conditional standpoint. Of course, we're all cheerful and relatively happy, but based on certain criteria being true. This is not what the fundamental question is about. What is my fulfillment, which nothing can trump? Fulfillment which nothing can step over, nothing can diminish, nothing can add onto. What is that permanent fulfillment which nothing can complement or subtract or insult or make doubtful or, right, empty out. It is consistent. This is the fundamental question. And therefore, Krishna, now hearing all of this, hearing Arjuna's explanation of what he or she is going through, he has a smile on his face, and because he knows that the context is just right for the whole teaching to take place, and that we will all for generations benefit. And now in the next verse, verse 11, Krishna will point out who is unwise. And Krishna will put Arjuna in the unwise category, and we will see why. Verse 11, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Ashochayan Anvashochastvam Prajnavadamscha Bhashase Gatasun Agatasumscha Nanu Shochanti Panditaha.
Sri Bhagavan said, "You grieve for those who are not be grieved for, yet you speak words of wisdom. The wise do not grieve for those who are gone and who are not yet gone."
So this is interesting because Krishna in verse 11 starts the teaching officially. So the Gita, when we say the Bhagavad Gita, you say, what is the whole Bhagavad Gita about? The whole teaching actually starts from verse 11. And Krishna starts by saying, Panditaha na anushochanti ashochayan anvashochastvam. So he says that wise people do not grieve for those who are not to be grieved for. And now you ask, well, then who are those who are not to be grieved for? Because first of all, we empathize with Arjuna. Arjuna is grieving to a certain extent, for his people. But then Krishna says the wise ones don't grieve for those who are gone and who are not yet gone. In other words, for those whose life has ended, and for those who are still alive and breathing. And this is kind of a confusing statement because it almost like implies that a wise person is this stoic, is always has this equilibrium, and it doesn't, get affected by anything, and they're almost cold and they don't grieve, they're at a funeral and they're just like nothing, right? It's just totally apathetic. So this can give a lot of first-time impressions of like, what's this Gita? It's denying reality. It's denying life. But does this sound like life? Just to be this stoic, non-responsive, cold, apprehensive to grief person? Not at all. Okay, so this means there's a deeper understanding between the statements. And what Krishna is talking about here is the vision of a wise person. Now, before I move on, the difference between a wise person and just a knowledgeable person is a twofold thing. A knowledgeable person is like, with all due respect to a scholar, right? They know a lot. They've memorized statements, and they're able to give you these well put statements, and they're all memorized. However, it doesn't necessarily translate to understanding it or bringing it down into your being, into understanding, into seeing life according to the knowledge that you have. So when we say a wise person, he or she is not only knowledgeable, but also has brought down that knowledge into their beingness. So their understanding is genuinely an expression of that knowledge. So a wise person, it says, the vision, how does a wise person look at life? What questions has the wise person asked? Whatever questions the wise person has asked and keeps asking, those same questions an unwise person has not yet asked, or is yet to begin asking. So, for example, what is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of being alive? What is the highest accomplishment for a lifetime? Is the accomplishment individual, or is there one universal accomplishment which is of the highest nature for both you and me, and for those who have gone before us, and for those who are yet to be born? Is there one universal highest accomplishment? what is, right, the bigger reality here? Is it just, this world and these physical forms and scientific instrumentations and the knowledge that we have about what they provide us? Or is there more that science hasn't quite been able to, tell us yet? So these questions a wise person has asked and continues to ask, and the unwise person has not yet began to ask these questions. And therefore, now Arjuna, for that reason, is being put in the unwise category but he is open to becoming wise. That's why he asked Krishna, give me answers to those two to the fundamental question and to the situational question. Therefore, now one thing is that let's not put people now into wise and unwise category, because life is not that black or white. You have, for example, Arjuna unwise, you have Bhishma unwise, you have Karna unwise, you have Duryodhana unwise. So you have many unwise categories. But what's the difference between, for example, Arjuna unwise and Duryodhana unwise? Because they're both unwise. They both are looking for answers. What's the difference between both of them being unwise?
Duryodhan does not feel that he's unwise. He's very centered in his conviction as to what is required to be done, and he feels he's very right. But Arjuna knows that there's a dilemma and there are answers to be taken from somebody who's wiser than him.
I was thinking about the word ahimsa and how people apply that word, not doing harm. And yet, like I could just see Duryodhana. I mean, he maliciously actually has tried to murder Arjuna and his brothers. And on the other hand, there's the kind of ahimsa. What do you do if your dharma is as a soldier protecting, your family, your country? Well, the meaning of ahimsa for that person is different.
Difference between Arjuna and Duryodhana, both unwise. But I think Arjuna realized that there is someone wiser than him who can give him that advice, like Krishna. He recognized what Krishna can offer, whereas probably Duryodhana never understood that.
Super.
He missed that point.
Super wonderful. So all three responses are well put together. And what I heard is that both of them, yes, are unwise. You can even have two, right, relatively good people. They're both unwise, but one of them is open to becoming wise. The other is just sort of, cruising along in their non-wisdom, and they're okay with it. Arjuna is open to becoming wise, and for that reason, he is able to, right, listen and stay and look for look for solutions. Now, in the next verse, Krishna will explain, right, who is wise and why doesn't a wise person grieve? Because so far he says a wise person doesn't grieve for those who are gone and not yet gone. Why? What is the reason? He will also explain the vision of the wise person and what do they understand that makes them have a relatively composed composure towards those who are gone and not yet gone. And Krishna will also explain the nature of Atma. Now, the word Atma is a word in Sanskrit, which means when you say, for example, who's talking, and you say, I am, right? You just say, I am. Now, whatever that I is, this is what Atma is. Or you say, and who said that? Well, I did, right? Me, I did, me. So when I say the word Atma, it's just me or I, just nothing strange about it, nothing philosophical about it, just this natural, right, response that you have in your local language, like I or me or self. We sometimes say self. The only thing is that you don't usually say self, but you can. For example, hey, look at yourself. Look at yourself. So you take the word your away and you just have the word self. So it just refers to this conscious being that you know yourself to be, right? This familiar being that you are. So all of this will be now explained by Krishna in verse 12.
Duryodhana's position in this entire Mahabharata was his selfishness, need to possess it despite of hurting anyone else. He wasn't considering about others. He was more in his own self-gain and self-need. Whereas Arjuna was thinking of how much he's going to hurt everyone and what he's going to do. So there was more selfless and selfish desires. Yeah, that's the difference I saw in a lot of.
Got it. So what Rani is saying is that even though both of them were looking for answers to life, and of course Duryodhana is also looking for answers, to life in his own way. The only thing is that Arjuna was considering the impact of the whole. So this is what we already, brought into, is that the mind, as you become more evolved, you're able to capture the nuances of how my actions are impacting the larger whole. And it's not something that you do. You don't suddenly, oh, I'm supposed to do this. You don't do thinking about others. The more your mind becomes evolved, the more your mind expands and you start to bring the nuances of life, the more you spontaneously start to include everyone else. Because there's this thing where, you say, well, I'm over here. This is where the boundaries of self end. And therefore, all that self cares about is this much. But the more my mind expands, the more it's able to break through these boundaries that are confined within this body. And in that sense, what Rani is saying is that you're able to now look at everything else as also having some connection to self, to you. For that reason, you're more considerate. You're kind of, looking at how your actions are impacting the whole, because ultimately it always comes back to you, not necessarily in a physical way, but you have to bear that thought of what kind of person am I who just sort of does this without, caring much about the impact of other people. So this may not be felt immediately, but as the mind matures, it's going to suddenly start to feel all of that pain of having disregarded the well-being of other people. And this is how the setup is made. You cannot skip those things that have been buried down just because once upon a time I was not evolved enough to see how it's impacting the larger whole. That whatever is buried is going to come out in the future. So it's very easy to sort of just exploit earth resources and treat others unfairly and insult others in the political field and in your personal field. It's very easy to do that. But the way that the system is made is that because I'm not accounting the well-being of others, that will in some way show up in your life in an uncomfortable way. If you look at nature, for example, nature is made to take care of everyone. It's only we who then start to exploit and then start to overuse, and then the nature starts to suffer. And then you look at the air and you're breathing air, polluted air, and who has contributed to that polluted air? Well, the collective me's have contributed to that polluted air. And then when you multiply that for years to come, then what happens is that it all now starts to come back onto the individual, where we've overexploited resources. We didn't, kind of take care of others, enough, their needs. And so now you say, well, who's gonna clean our sewers? Who's going to take our trash out? All of this, there are people out there who, you could call it is the other side, the Kaurava side. And yet those people have total, contribution in your life that you would never even believe, that you will not even connect. The same person I look at on this train, and I say, oh, who's this person? That person is the one because of which you can flush your toilet, and then that water goes and it gets cleaned up and it goes into the rivers, and that water then I drink and I say, oh, I'm enjoying my life. So there's a certain setup in this world where there's an connected, intricate network, and you are totally dependent upon this network. Okay, so this is what Rani is bringing up, and therefore the more you become sensitive and evolved, the more you're able to think about naturally about the interconnected web of all of us. Okay, now in verse 12, Krishna changes the topic and he brings it more into a personal inquiry. So he wants to now say, yes, there is this vast network, out there, and which you are also not, apart from. But then who is this you? Who is this I that is always, right, kind of just doing and talking and thinking and living and breathing? Who is this person? So let's see what verse 12 says. Natve vaham jatunasam natvam ne me janadhipaha nachaiva na bhavishyamaha sarve vayam ataf param.
There was never a time that I did not exist, neither you nor these kings, nor will any of us cease to exist in the future.
Arjuna's problem right now is that he's grieving because he's looking at all of these people and he's thinking, I'm going to kill everybody. This is like a natural conclusion. And he understands that the word Atma, or self, or the nature of the individual, is as good as the body. However, Krishna uses this opportunity because he recognizes where Arjuna is coming from, where that grief is arising from. And Krishna uses this very important opportunity to show Arjuna that the nature of I, from every single standpoint, from the standpoint of every single one of those individuals on the Kurukshetra, including Arjuna himself, is much bigger than just what is about to be killed. Because Arjuna therefore thinks the individual is going to be killed. But Krishna understands the individual to be much bigger, much vaster than just what I see, movement, and there's my guru, and there's Bhishma with a bow and arrow, and, on the chariot. So therefore, Krishna's vision is going beyond this. And how does he show this to Arjuna? Well, he starts by saying that there was never a time that I did not exist. And you say, wow, this is obviously, naturally coming from Krishna. He's an avatara. He is, he is a Lord incarnate. So obviously we, understand where Krishna is coming from. There was never a time when the intelligence didn't exist. So the intelligence was always is, always will be. And there was never a time when intelligence began. It was always true manifesting the universe and everything else in the universe. And therefore you say, well, this is Krishna speaking about himself. But then immediately Krishna cancels this assumption and he follows up with another statement and he says, and there was never a time when you did not exist, nor will there ever be a time when you will cease to exist. And you go, oh, wow, this is interesting. So if there was never a time when the Lord, Ishvara, did not exist, and there will never be a time when Ishvara will cease to exist, and now Krishna says there was never a time when you did not exist, that means there was never a time when you were born. There was never a time, once upon a time, when you, self, Atma, were suddenly magically born for the first time. And there will never be a time when you, Atma, will cease to exist. This is a different way of looking at it. I was looking at on YouTube, I mean, maybe even in real life, I saw once, you sit down at a table and what do they call him? A fortune teller, a clairvoyant will tell a little bit about you. And they, one of the times they said, okay, I'm going to now tell when you were born, when you came into existence. And you're like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. I really want to know, when did I come into existence for the first time ever? And they will say, you came into existence, 5 generations ago in 1901. You're like, wow. So I was made in 1901. This is amazing. So before then, what happened? You did not exist. You're a new soul. How many times have you heard this? You're a new soul. You're an old soul. Oh, wow, you're such an old soul. You're so wise. You're such a new soul. You just came into existence recently. This is canceled out by Krishna's statement. He says there was never a time when you, no matter who this you is, in the past, present, and the future, when you did not exist. That means you You never were born. You always existed. And there will never be a time when you will suddenly go out of existence. So naturally, Krishna cannot be talking about your physical body, because your physical body has naturally not existed once upon a time. Your parents came together and a process took place, and then a body began to grow. So Krishna cannot be talking about this body at all. Thus, this Atma, who you are, is therefore immortal. It will never come to an end. And so, and he says, this is your true nature. And as long as your Atma, yourself, is placed in that which is born and that which dies, such as your body and your mind, as long as that's true, you will continue to come and go, come and go, come and go. Why? Because yourself is placed in that which comes and goes. And yet Krishna is saying, you were never born, nor will you ever die. So now we have to explain, how is this possible? And how will this be done? This will be done through a prakriya. Prakriya means a methodology. It's a method by which we show you that there is something more about your experience than you are used to. And in the Gita, we have many prakriyas. Okay, so prakriya means a methodology by which we show you a certain understanding. And one of the prakriyas that is going to be shown right now is that in your experience, there is two categories to understand. In your experience, there is something called your intrinsic nature and the incidental attribute. I'm going to write this down on the board and I'm going to explain it. Incidental attribute. And here we're going to put different color, intrinsic nature. Now, you're probably asking, what is this incidental? Okay, so incidental means that which is not essential for the existence of something else. So, for example, we have this whiteboard, right? And the whiteboard is a whiteboard. So the whiteboard doesn't need these colors to sort of make the whiteboard what it is. The colors can come, they can go. I can put different kinds of colors here on this whiteboard, right? I can draw different faces. No matter what happens on the whiteboard never gets affected. So the colors never change the nature of the whiteboard. The whiteboard is intrinsic to itself. That means it's experiencing itself as a whiteboard. A whiteboard is a whiteboard. So no matter what I draw here, right, I can erase this. It doesn't affect the whiteboard. So therefore, the incidental attribute is not essential to the existence of the whiteboard. The changes of the attributes of the colors, right? Colors such as, I put the word love here, or I put the word hate. Okay? Does the word love now, while it's on this whiteboard, does it affect the nature of the whiteboard? Does the whiteboard now become love just because I've written love onto it? No? Okay. Now, suppose I erase the word love, I erase the incidental attributes, and I maybe put it with red, I'll put the word hate. Now, the whiteboard seems to have an attribute of hate onto it. But does hate define the whiteboard? Why not? Because the word hate, or whatever is on the existence of the whiteboard, does not define the whiteboard because it is incidental. Incidental means it can come and it can go, only to be replaced by something totally opposite in nature. No matter what I put on this whiteboard, I can erase it, I can add colors, I can create a whole story called the human life. And I can start writing down, once upon a time, there lived Adam and Eve, or there lived, a great sage. And those sages then gave birth to some sons who then gave a family to some moms, and the moms were so happy that their kings became Bharata, who then gave birth to Bhishma, and then the whole Mahabharata war started, and you just keep on writing a whole long story on this whiteboard. Nothing that you write affects the nature of the whiteboard, because the whiteboard is intrinsic to itself. Now, what does the word intrinsic mean? It means it is essential to existence of itself. Okay? For example, saltiness is intrinsic to the salt. If I take saltiness out, is it salt? No. Wherever there's saltiness, that's exactly where salt is. Wherever there's salt, that's exactly where saltiness is. So in other words, the intrinsic nature of salt is saltiness. But is saltiness and salt different? No. Therefore, when I say intrinsic nature, it means that which is essential for its existence. But it's not that it's something else, it is itself. For example, the whiteboard is intrinsic to itself because it is self-sustaining, it is self-dependent. It doesn't depend on different words, different stories, different things to be written onto it, different smiles, and all of these things that are written on the board are erased from the board. All of that comes and goes, and can be replaced, and none of it sticks to the whiteboard. Therefore, whatever doesn't stick onto the whiteboard is called incidental. Why is it incidental? Because it doesn't define the whiteboard. It comes and goes, it can be changed, and it's also not essential to the nature of the whiteboard. Why is it not essential to the nature of the whiteboard? Because I can go like this, erase the whole thing. What's gone? What's gone? Incidental attributes. What stays? The intrinsic nature of the whiteboard. That means what stays? That which was there all along, even before the incidental attributes came. Once upon a time, like this. Then story. And then you have 8 billion stories. It's called 8 billion people coming and going, each writing their story on this whiteboard. And then comes, Mother Teresa, then comes Gandhi, and then comes, some president here and there, and they all leave their mark for how long? How long did they leave their mark for? 90 years, like this. And then again, not again, but all while one is going, new is being added. And therefore, no matter where the story gets added, what's always there? The same existence which was there before the story got added. Therefore, is there a place now when I cannot find this whiteboard? Suppose this whiteboard is infinite, expands in all directions. Is this place of the whiteboard any different than this place of the whiteboard? No. Why not? Explain.
Because it is, because it is the basis for all stories to be written. It is the adhisthana.
Adhisthana. So in other words, it's
ashrit relationship.
Yeah, in other words, it's a substratum upon which lends its existence for the chance of incidental attributes to be written. So look at this. I'm going like this. Can you see anything being written? Why not? I'm writing. What do we need to do? We need to come closer and closer. Oh, look, magic. Magic gets written. Why does magic get written? Because without the substratum, even if there is a potential for amazing stories to get written, that potential has no chance without, as Gautam says, adhisthana, a substratum upon which you can get to observe the changes, get to observe the incidental attributes taking place on the substratum of this existent board. So by the existence of this board, it makes known, it brings to light what? Incidental attributes. By the existence of this whiteboard, being the substratum, because of its beingness, it makes or gives the chance for the story of incidental attributes to get written all day long, from morning to evening, from morning to evening. Now, look at this. In the morning, what is there? The morning is there in the morning. But when the evening is gone, so morning gets written on the substratum of the board of existence. Now, when evening comes, what is there? Morning is no longer there, evening is there. But during the evening, the morning is not there. During the morning, the evening is not there. But what is there during the morning? The substratum. What is there during the evening? The substratum. So both the evening for you and the morning for you are known, are observed. Why? Because you're going through, right? The body, mind is going through an experience of morning, an experience of evening. The attributes of morning are there, they're gone. Attributes of evening are there, they're gone. But there is one existence upon which the experience of the morning person is written on, and there is one existence upon which the experience of the evening person is written on. And what is that one substratum, one existence? It is Atma. It is self. That which never comes and goes, remains exactly the same as it always is, the one reality upon which the life story of you gets written. The life story of Andre gets written on this one existence. The life story of Gautam, the life story of Colin, life story of Greg, all life stories get written on the same existent substratum, without which nothing can get observed for being, going through changes, for being what it is, for being what it's not. The whole thing gets written on one existence. Therefore, in Sanskrit, we call, now this is kind of more technical now. In Sanskrit, we say incidental is called tatastha lakshana. Okay, tatastha lakshana. And the intrinsic, your intrinsic nature is called your sva. Remember, sva means your own. Sva rupa lakshana. Therefore, tatastha lakshana is that which is, right, not essential for the existence of the substratum. And intrinsic nature, that which is essential to the substratum. And what is essential to the substratum? Well, it is it's self-existing. It is existence of itself. It is self-existing. Therefore, your nature is intrinsic nature, swarupa, my own nature, lakshana. In other words, what is intrinsic nature? It is the substratum on which the changes of life are taking place. It is the existence upon which the changes of your body and mind are taking place. And you can never be without it. Why? Because it is your intrinsic nature. It survives the changes taking place. Just like there is one existence which survives the morning, one existence which survives the evening. When the morning is gone, when the evening is gone, the body of the morning is gone. How different is your body today, right now, than it was in the morning? Some of us are waking up in the morning, right, Nina? Yeah, so maybe not for you too. Okay, but maybe morning person is like this. Now, evening person is like that. Two different bodies altogether. How many cells have you lost since the morning? Hundreds of millions, even billions of cells. How many thoughts did you have in the morning that you no longer have right now? Hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds. You may not notice it, but there is no connection between your body or your mind in the morning, and there is no connection between your body and your mind in the evening. It's like two different people altogether, only giving you an impression that they're the same people. Why? Because we have a general kind of a thing where you have to have some sense of continuity. We'll get to why. That's called the ahamkara. But there is a general memory which gives you a sense that there is a continuity. But if you analyze your experience, there is not one thing that is different. There's the same between now and in the morning. So I want to bring this a little bit more down into our personal experience.
May I, Andre?
Yes, please.
Yeah, there is a famous analogy of Swami Vivekananda when he says you have the center everywhere, but no, you cannot find the circumference.
There's no boundary.
Circumference is endless, is the actual substratum reality. But for us, before we know that reality, we are connected with our body, mind, and intellect, and therefore we feel the reality is this what we see ourselves. Therefore, we find a center in this reality without knowing that the whole thing, the substratum, is endless, and therefore there is no circumference. In case of a non-duality, if it is endless, for anything endless, there will be no center. So the substratum itself will have no center at all.
So there is something about you that doesn't come and go, and there is something about you in your experience that is fluctuating constantly. So let's look at your body. Your body constantly undergoes changes, as I explained, from morning to evening, from a youth to old age, from a child, a whole different person. Where is that kid right now who you were, that your body was? Where is that kid right now? In other words, your body has died to the child to give birth to a teenager. The teenager has died to give birth to the adult. And yet, do you experience like you've died 3 times so far to be this adult? Oh, okay. So now let's look at your mind. Your mind, right, is your senses. Your senses are even themselves, when you were younger, you were having much sharper vision, or you were able to hear much better. And sometimes we have tinnitus, right? Ringing of the ears. Even that gets reported in the presence of you, the one existent being, right? Without which you could not kind of tell that there is this fluctuating experience of the senses themselves. Never mind what is being reported by the senses, but I'm talking about the health condition of the senses themselves. So not only are objects, right, incidental, coming and going, but the very reporters of those objects are also coming and going in terms of how well they function. For example, one moment, I can taste food, then we catch some illness, and now the senses can no longer taste, nor can you smell anything, but that too gets reported, gets observed in the presence of this one existence, which is Atma. Or you take your mind. Your mind every day, seemingly more times than the scientists say of 60,000, changes 60,000 times per day. Everything about your mind, your person, like Pankaj, when we say the word Pankaj, the name Pankaj, or we say Rani, this person 60,000 times more or less changes every single moment, every single day. Because just to move your head from one side of the room to the other, you see so many different objects, and each of those objects changes what your mind is seeing. So don't think that your mind is some special thing that is over here and the world is over there. What you're seeing right now is a product of your mind taking the shape that looks like this. And what is in your mind right now? Your mind is now sculpted itself to look like a phone, to look like a laptop, to look like a computer screen. The moment you look ahead and you look towards the one side of the room, now the mind has sculpted itself to look like a totally different scene with a picture, with a wall, with something else. So your mind changes according to what your senses report. Don't think that your mind is like some separate thing over there and senses are something else. It is one thing that is collectively capturing data from the world and constantly shaping and shifting itself, to take on the nature, to take on the world as it appears outside of this body. That's all your mind really does. It just captures data, it assimilates that data inside itself, and it replicates that data to look like what the world looks like.
That means that our life is a tussle with what is intrinsic and what is not.
Yes.
What we call Maya. It's a tussle with Maya that we have to fight all along the line.
We haven't used the word Maya yet, so let's not.
I know. Let's say incidental,
right.
incidents. And on the other side of the spectrum is science, where there is these days there's a tremendous emphasis on neuroplasticity of the brain, and the brain is able to adjust to any kind of situation in no time at all. How do you relate that with this?
Okay, sure. I have to finish my inquiry and then I can kind of answer that. So, so the brain, sure, it changes constantly. It fires and wires itself to help the mind communicate, so that there's a brain communicating with the mind. So there are two different orders of matter. They're both matter, and that's why we say there's a body-mind influence. If I take a drug, a physical drug, it's going to affect my physical brain, but that physical activity of the brain is also going to affect your thoughts. So your physical affects your mental, but when you have a mental remembrance of something beautiful, then it affects the brain, the hippocampus, for example, or the hypothalamus, and it releases dopamine, releases a certain chemical that drowns the body, drowns the brain, and therefore you then say, oh, I'm experiencing a certain kind of a thing, an emotion right now. So there's a body-mind connection in this sense. Okay, so your mind, going back to the inquiry, your mind also right now is constantly changing every single time a new word comes out of my mouth. Your mind is constantly shaping and shifting itself every time a new experience gets delivered. So what happens is then, when we forget the nature that I am this underlying existence, which doesn't come and go, then what happens is you naturally put yourself, put your eye into whatever is happening in the mind. So if the mind is taking on an emotion of extreme anxiety, then your eye gets associated with that anxiety, and then you say, I, the self, which is a substratum of anxiety, am anxious. In other words, me, the board, am whatever, anxious right now. So this is what happens with, not knowing the reality between intrinsic nature and your incidental attributes, which are meant to come and go. You are meant to experience different conditions and emotions and responses based on whatever the environment gives you. It's never going to stop. So we're not talking about stopping the process of the mind. We're talking about just recognizing there is, in my experience, two things going on. One of them, it is a constant flux, a constant variable things going on. The other, there's an invariable presence, and that invariable presence, which hasn't changed from morning to evening, is this one common existence, one substratum that survives the changes happening to your body, happening to your senses, happening to your mind. How many changes are happening to your body, senses, and the mind? Millions times per day. You're losing millions of cells. Your body's losing millions of cells per day. Your senses are constantly changing. In the morning, you're feeling like this, the body is feeling like that. and then the mind's having certain happiness in the morning, some, concern in the afternoon, then again, joy in the evening. It's just constantly fluxing, going through a flux, going through changes. The story is constantly being written upon whom? Upon you, that one who is intrinsic to yourself. As what? Intrinsic as what? As the substratum of existence. The existence upon which the changes of experience belonging to Vijay are taking place for how long? Since Vijay body was born. That experience of Andre taking place for how long? Since Andre body was born. So there's one substratum, one common essential existence upon which the story of every single person is being written on since beginningless time. Since this, never mind beginningless time, since this world has been has entered your eyes, that's called birth. So when Krishna says there was never a time when you were not born, there was never a time when you will cease to exist, he's not talking about your incidental attributes of your body or your mind or the senses. He's talking about the common existence, the underlying existence upon which the experience right now, I'm not talking about tomorrow or some philosophical matter that took place at the banks of Ganga River between Shankara and an opposing school of philosophy. I'm talking about right now, on whom is this experience taking place of listening to these words? On one self, one common existence. But why is the experience different from this standpoint, and why is the experience different from that standpoint? Because of a different instrument. There's a different instrument here, there's a different instrument there. 50.
And because of there is an incidental multiplicity.
Because the incidental attributes are different. There is a very different instrument that is programmed to feel different, to act different, to think different from this standpoint. Then there is an instrument from that standpoint that is sitting down on the chair, or maybe you're standing up. I don't know what you're doing. And when I say you doing, that means your body, mind is doing right now. But in the presence of whom is that doing observed? In the presence of one common intrinsic self, Atma. So the one common is the common from this standpoint, making the changes of this body, mind observed. And the one common is the same from that standpoint, making the changes from that standpoint observed. One observer observing many different instruments having different experiences in this moment. Why is the experience different? Not because the existence is different. Why is the experience different? Because the stories are different. How many stories? However many people you have, however many individuals you got. Now this Atma, it being your fundamental nature, being the fundamental nature of all individuals, cannot ever go away, because it is that which observes things going away and things coming back. If Atma were to go away, then who would be there observing that Atma went away? You understand? So the only thing that can go away is not Atma. The only thing that can go away is the incidental attributes. In the presence of me, self, there is knowledge of the fact that incidental attributes are coming, going, coming, going. If I, the Atma, were to go away, then who would be observing that if Atma has gone away? So the logic breaks down. In other words, you cannot say that Atma gone away, because just to say that there was nothing, in the presence of whom was there nothing? In the presence of I, self. There was total silence. There was total bliss in my Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In the presence of whom was the total bliss in the Nirvikalpa Samadhi? In the presence of self, the existence upon which that experience called absence of thoughts has taken place. And then the person comes back out of their meditation, and now they say, oh, my life has come back. in the presence of whom has the life come back? In the presence of the very same existence that was there when the life has gone away in meditation. In other words, that which never goes away is Atma. That which comes and goes for beginningless time is what we call incidental attributes, or your life story, that you keep on putting your eye inside that story, and then you go, oh, I'm going through a hard time. Oh, I am like this. I am, give me some respite. Therefore, when we bring this knowledge out, we simply point out it is not like you're producing Atma. You cannot produce that which was never born. You understand this? If it was not, if it's a matter of birth, then it's a matter of producing. But Atma, self, was never born. Therefore, we're not producing a new experience. We're simply bringing out that which doesn't come and go and pointing out that which comes and goes. So you cannot ever have an experience of Atma. Why? Because an experience is, I know, Gautam, another incidental attribute, which was not there a moment ago, but what was there a moment ago? Me, the observer, in whom there was nothing. And then the thought of a kangaroo comes. Who is there observing the thought, the mind, going through a shape of a kangaroo? Same Atma. Kangaroo goes away, now gets replaced by an elephant. Who is still there observing the absence of the kangaroo and the presence of the elephant? The same existence which was there all along. Therefore, thoughts come and go, but I, the self, am available to recognize in the presence of one existence. I am available to recognize the comings and goings of incidental attributes belonging to the instrument, which we call Greg, Bhuvana, David, Ashnil, Meena, Lorena, Stephen, Michael, Ravi, Gautam, Jonathan, etc. The instrument changes. It's meant to change. That's what it's designed to do, to respond to the world, to the situation. But upon which the changes are taking place is one common substratum, which we call of the nature of existence. And what kind of existence is it? Is it just some inert existence? No, it is of the nature of awareness. It is of the nature of existence, sat. And what kind of existence is it? Just some dead, inert, unconscious existence? No, it is of the nature of awareness. It is awareful existence. In other words, no matter what gets written on the board of existence, what happens? By the mere virtue of the board of the existence being awareful, you say, in the presence of me, the existent one, there is awareness of the life story. Life story, life story. In the presence of whom is there awareness of the life story? In the presence of I, Atma, there is awareness of the life story, which is incidental, called your name. That is your life story. That is a life story from that standpoint. That is a life story from this standpoint. That is a life story from the standpoint of those who have lived before us thousands of years ago. And what is one common denominator across the board? Where there is existence, there is an awareful existence. And what is that awareful existence? Who is existing right now? You say, I am. And what kind of an existence are you enjoying right now? You say, an awareful existence. That is because your nature is existence, which is of awareness. What kind of existence do you have right now? Are you enjoying? Conscious existence, an awareful existence. Why is that? Not because of the incidental story called your body-mind, but because of you, that which is independent of the life story. That is why Krishna says there was never a time when I, existence awareness, was not. And there will never be a time when I, existence awareness, will cease to exist. Therefore, he's talking about not your body, not your mind, because body has died to itself how many times since you were a child? Hundreds of times, thousands of times. He's not talking about your mind because the morning mind has died to the evening mind. The child's mind, who had so many different desires for girls, toys, and boys, and this and that, has died to give birth to give way to the mind of a teenager. The teenager's mind has given way to an adult mind. The adult mind will give way to a mind that experiences dementia and amnesia. That mind will give way to a mind of its final moments. In other words, the life story, the incidental attributes constantly get written on the board of myself. One self upon which different instruments are experiencing from their standpoint. Why is existence awareness, listen to the question, experiencing a different experience from this standpoint compared to that standpoint?
Like you said, because of different instruments.
Super.
Each instrument is giving a different story, but the substratum is same. The ultimate subject is the same.
In other words, why is the experience of one existence awareness different? Not because of existence awareness, but because of the life story being different from every different standpoint. My life story of Andre is very different than the life story of Gautam. That is why Gautam is, from that standpoint, existence awareness will, right, seemingly experience itself as different as compared to Andre. But either way, it is one reality on which different life stories are coming and going, coming and going.
You mentioned the experiencer or the observer who is noticing the change. That is not the Atma, right? Because it can't notice or feel any change. So is it not the mind or the ahankara or whatever that's experiencing it, right?
Good. So the question is, what is really the observer? The observer is always Atma, but Atma, by the help of the mind, is able to observe. Okay, so the Atma needs an instrument through which observation takes place. That's how existence awareness can see the world. Why can it see the world? Because there is a senses of the eyes, ears, and there's a mind that's able to process it all. And the mind being totally pervaded by you, it becomes known to I. It becomes known to Atma. Stephen?
Yeah, I was thinking, would it be correct to interpret the mind almost like a prism? So the pure consciousness, whatever you want to call it, is reflected through what is essentially prism of the mind. That's where we're all experiencing different experiences.
Yeah, so in other words, from the standpoint of, right, Andre, there is a seeming enclosure, like this one, right, universal existence awareness is enclosed from this standpoint. And equally, it feels like that from the standpoint of Stephen. It seems like one conscious being is located just here and not over there. It's not like that's right or wrong. It's supposed to be like that. It's made to be like that while there's a body-mind. So even for a wise person, they also experience one universal existence awareness only here and not over there. So don't think now that Krishna is experiencing himself as like everywhere. The moment you have a body and a mind born, immediately what happens is there is an as though confinement. As though, not actual confinement. Why do I say as though? Because the body-mind's presence, the body-mind birth makes this existence awareness as though confined only here and not over there. Okay, so it's not an actual imprisonment, it's as though imprisonment, but we don't call it imprisonment, we call it confinement.
So it's an appearance.
We just say it's seemingly confined, but it's not actually confined. Okay.
Andre, isn't it similar to the pot space and space outside?
I will get to this analogy much later. Okay. Good. So I will elaborate on this. Thank you, Rani. What Stephen has said, using an analogy in the future session.
Andre, I was also thinking, the mind being such a strong instrument, like this is a personal experience when I'm actually like painting, really into painting, like almost in that effect of painting, I forget even my body pains or my body existence sometimes.
Yeah.
I forget that. Is that similar to what we are explaining? Because it's actually the mind that puts the awareness of what's happening around us.
No, that's different. What you're experiencing is called, you're totally focused. The mind is totally focused. But in the presence of this one existence awareness, there's an experience of the person called Rani's mind being totally focused. And therefore, right, it feels like, that's all there is in that moment. So we're not so that's a slightly different thing. What you're talking about is modification of the mind, Rani. You're talking about a modification of the mind. It's called the zone. And people love to do this. They love to jump out of airplanes and feel like they're in the zone. But we're not talking about a modification of the mind. We're talking about the presence in whom the modification of the mind is observed, is known to be what it is. Okay? So let me finish this inquiry. Therefore, as we, naturally, through mere habit, keep putting this existence, your existent self, in one or more of these incidental attributes, then what happens? Then whatever the body mind is going through is exactly what I, Atma, am going through. Therefore, body mind is going through sensations of pain. I am going through sensations of pain, which is fine. But when it becomes problematic is when you make it a big deal, right? It now becomes much more exaggerated than it deserves to be. So it's not like the wise person doesn't grieve. They grieve, but because they understand that these people are much more than just the body and the mind, there's a certain composure to the grieving. That's why it's not like a wise person is completely stoic, like, oh, they're just pieces of paper, just a suit that's being worn by existence awareness, and the suit's going to get all crumbled up, thrown away, a new suit is going to get born. It's not like that, because there's still a human being that has, genuine emotions. So therefore, when we put our Atma in the one or more of your life stories called you, your name, that's when it becomes exaggerated, that a whole emotion of death, and therefore I become mortal. Why do I become mortal? Because body mind is mortal, and my eye is placed in that which is mortal. Therefore, when the body mind dies? Who as though dies? I die, which is why we have so much fear of death, because we think our eye is placed in the body mind, and therefore it dies, I am gone. And therefore you have extending, genetical research, curing cancer, anything to stay alive for as long as possible, because I don't want to die. So it has a huge impact on how you actually live, understanding where is your nature. So now the question is, what's the difference between what the wise person understands and what's the difference between a wise person and an unwise person? Well, a wise person understands that your self, the underlying substratum, that which survives the death of the mind, the death and the birth of the body, survives all incidental life stories, never gets tainted by what happens to the story of your personhood. Always remains exactly the same, just like this whiteboard remains exactly the same no matter where you look at it. Always remains pure, and nothing sticks onto it. Because if something were to stick onto you, Atma, then what would happen is, by the time you look at an elephant, or you imagine an elephant, and then I say now, imagine a kangaroo. Now, what happens in your experience? The elephant goes away, and immediately you, Atma, are available, freshly available to give awareness to the kangaroo. And then the kangaroo goes away, and then again, you, Atma, are freshly available to give awareness to nothing, absence of thoughts. And then a new thought comes, and now the thought starts to say, oh, I am not good enough. oh, I will never understand this. Oh, this is over my head. In the presence of Atma, those thoughts become illumined. Those thoughts belonging to the instrument called your mind. Therefore, even your opinions, even the opinions about Atma are known by Atma. Therefore, they do not taint Atma, because those opinions go away. Tomorrow, you wake up to brand new, fresh opinions in the presence of Atma. They too get illumined for what they are. They too get awared, and thus you say, ah, new thought, new life story, new person. Therefore, the wise person understands Atma never gets tainted by any incidental life story, any incidental attribute that comes and goes, but also understands that, yes, I am given this body and mind, and while I am given this body and mind, let me use it to undertake this journey of life. To the best of my ability, let me do what is to be done. Let me solve the situational, dharma samudha chetaha. Let me take care of the situational issues, but I never lose track that there is one Atma, because of whom all of the situations belonging to this person called your name belong. But they do not belong to I. They do not belong to me. Whereas the unwise person, what happens there is they keep making Atma part of the body-mind. In other words, incidental attributes are associated closely with Atma. Therefore, Atma keeps on taking different incidental attributes of pain, of pleasure, of your cheerfulness, of concern, and therefore life becomes a life of sukha and dukkha. In fact, this will be explained in verse 13. What happens? Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara tatha dehantara praptihi dhirastatra namuhyati.
Just as for the jiva, the indweller of this body, there is childhood, youth, and old age. Similar is the gaining of another body. With reference to that, a wise person does not come to grief.
This body, as I said, is given to you to undertake a life journey. And it is programmed to go through stages. And these stages cannot be stopped. In fact, there is this talk of, law of attraction. I am the master, I'm the governor of the universe. I can attract whatever I want. Oh, really? If you're the governor, please stop aging. Come on. You're supposed to attract that too. You're supposed to be the governor. Please stop the process of what we call kaumaram. Kaumaram is youthfulness. Then there is yauvanam. Yauvanam is youth. And there is jara, there is old age. Please stop that. Please change the cycles of that if you can. Impossible. What else does the stages mean? What else do you go through? Well, you go through 6 stages. Your body goes through 6 stages, and that is asti. Once upon a time, you were a single cell. Your body was a single cell organism. It's called one cell. It multiplied, and now it became a little baby. And then what happened? Well, you got asti. It was in the fetus, and then it was jayate. It was born. And then what happens when it's born? It starts to slowly, vardhate, starts to grow and grow and grow. And then when it grows, it reaches viparinamate, it reaches a certain maturity, it's strong. But then when it's strong, just when it's strong and you're going, wow, I want this to last forever, what happens? Apakshiyate, it starts to slowly dwindle away, muscle, fat, all of this starts to change. And then what happens ultimately? The body and the mind, vinashyati, it has to go away. Now, just imagine how much this affects the self-esteem if my I is placed into these 6 stages or the 3 stages that I said. It's a huge thing, right? The whole life becomes about product buying and satisfying one's life and celebrating the birthdays, all just to kind of cover up the idea that it's all going to go into vinashyati, into death. So therefore, the Veda now asks, what is the life of a jiva? What is the life of a person? When I say jiva, I specifically mean what is the life of a person whose I is still stuck to thinking I am this much. So what is a jiva? A conscious being who is deeply associated to their body and mind and says, I am this much. I am these 6 stages, the one who exists, the one who dies. Well, the Veda says the life of a jiva, of a conscious sentient being, is one who keeps on dropping bodies and putting new bodies on, like a suit. Just like when this class ends, some of us will go and put this suit away, and then we will put a new suit on, and you will not agree for the suit, will you? You will not agree for your pajamas. Who grieves putting off their pajamas in the morning? Yeah, no one grieves. But if I have strong emotional connection to the pajamas and I'm so bound to them, then naturally I will have some form of greed there. So what happens is the jiva continues dropping their mind, putting on new kind of thoughts every life, dropping their body, putting on a new body. And what does the jiva consist of? Well, a jiva consists of 3 bodies, and this is another prakriya model in Vedanta. The first layer that makes up the jiva is called the physical body. The physical body is something that you take this instrument to the doctor and you say, you know, help me, give me some medicine or some pain or whatever. It goes through, right, aging and pain and, you know, and you have to take care of it. You have to exercise and you have to feed it. So it has to breathe air to keep surviving. 3 minutes or 4 minutes, try holding your breath. You are 3 minutes away from death right now. 3 minutes away from the death of this body. Just go like this. 3 or 4 minutes, done. That close to death. Death is just 4 minutes away. And then there is subtle body. The subtle body, also the word body, is something that you cannot quite see your thoughts under a microscope. When you go to a doctor, do you go to a doctor for them to look at the kind of thoughts you have or the kind of brain that you have? When you go to a radiologist or a neurologist, what do you go to a neurologist or radiologist for? For the physical brain. You don't go to them, even with the most sophisticated instruments, you don't go to them for your thoughts. For your thoughts, you go to a therapist or a psychologist. And then, even they don't have the right instrumentation. How do they extract that which is not inside any one of your brain cells? Because your brain cell is just a bunch of atoms and quarks. How do they extract the mind? How do they get the mind to come out? They say, what's going on? Talk. In other words, they depend on your physical instrument to speak in order to reveal the kind of objects that are making up your state of mind in that moment. And therefore, you have to talk and talk and talk. And therefore, they say, let me assess the condition of your mind. And therefore, I will prescribe some different mode of thinking to help your thought process have a little bit more of an order to itself. And you go, okay, I will have prescription of some psychological medicine. And then there is the causal body. The causal body is something that will be discussed next week. And it's very important to understand the causal body. And then we will see, bring this down, what is your relationship as Atma in reference to these 3 bodies? Where is your true identity? It will obviously not be in these 3 bodies, but I have to bring more, right, more detail to make it directly relatable. So you're connecting to my words. This will be done next week. Pankaj?
I had a question. Is Atma only one? Is it specific to each individual or all Atmas are together one?
The question is this one Sat Chit? Is it like pockets? This is what Sankhya would say. There is pockets of Atmas. So my Atma is different from your Atma and so on. It is one common Atma. So your I am, Pankaj, is exactly the same as my I am. And my I am is exactly the same as Krishna's I am. And Krishna's I am is exactly the same as Rama's, as Jesus's, as Buddha's. Now you're going to say, how do you prove this? This will be done in the following sessions. Purnamadav, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamudachyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnameva avashishyate. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.